This is Fadia, and welcome to the BGreen Media Literacy Project. Today we have with us two really special guests talking about food justice, community engagement, and critical pedagogy as it works out in the locality, and hopefully connecting it to larger debates around food justice and issues around community engagement, community action, and youth action to a larger, more global audience. So we have with us Dr. Deborah Habib, who's the Executive Director of Seeds of Solidarity. And we have Dr. Leda Cooks, who's a professor of Department of Communication at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. Thank you so much for being here and making this project worthwhile and talking about things that are really at the core of the food justice movement right now and connecting it to local projects and processes that are happening around us.
Yeah, it's great to be here.
Great, thanks. So would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself and where you come from and perhaps why I selected you to be here and what makes you two really cool and awesome to be?
Wow, that's a good start.
Yeah.
Good lead in. Do you want to go first and be cool and awesome first?
Yeah, sure. I was born that way. So I've been teaching at UMass at the University of Massachusetts for 21 years. And I'd say my whole career I've really been devoted to issues of civic engagement, which is basically just trying to connect what we do in the classroom to what's going on in the community and building sustainable communities and sustainable partnerships. And the other thing I'm really invested in is trying to change education in both in K through 12 or kindergarten through high school, as well as in the academy, and just trying to work for a more socially just educational environment. At the same time, trying to connect what we do in the university with what we do in the community.
All right. Great. Thank you. Deb.
So again, I'm Deb Habib, and got my doctorate at the University of Massachusetts with a focus on multicultural education and combining that with environmental education. So founded a nonprofit organization almost 20 years ago with my husband, Ricky Baruch, and it's called Seeds of Solidarity Education Center. And our mission is to awaken the power among youth, schools, and families to grow food everywhere, to transform hunger to health, and create resilient lives and communities. We are based about a half an hour from where we're filming right now in the community of Orange, which is a town in the North Quabbin region. And I can say a little bit more about that in a few moments, but it's a very different community than this college town community we find ourselves in, and we live there and work there. I'm not from there originally, but we found ourselves there because land was affordable and we could get it to create the kind of education site that we wanted to create. But the region suffers from a lot of rural poverty and trauma, and a lot of that goes back to the claiming of a fertile valley that is now the Quabbin Reservoir, which is Boston's water supply, and that was claimed but through eminent domain, sort of an early land grabbing, if you will, and flooded. And that took the region's agricultural and food producing potential and a lot of the economy out of commission. So it resulted in a lot of the economic despair that we find ourselves in. So we're among the many people working to revitalize our community and develop resiliency with many sectors within the region.
Great. So I think both of you did a pretty good job in situating yourselves into the arguments already that we're trying to engage with here. Just so that I wanted to start off this discussion by inviting you to describe a few of the key terms that we'll be engaging with throughout our conversation, so that everybody who's watching it is on the same page about what it really means, so that there are no misunderstandings or a better understanding of what it is that we're going to be talking about. So for each of you, very quickly, what would you say food justice means to each of you? Like, so Leda, like what would how would you define food justice?
Well, I guess I would start first with just saying that for me, I always say like food matters, and it matters both in terms of food is a material substance that we all need to survive, and it's vital to our survival. So we all have a common interest in that, but it also matters symbolically, and it matters very heavily to our identity, how we see ourselves culturally, how we view the group of people that we know. And it matters in terms of how nations are constructed. I mean, so it matters in many, many ways. And so my view toward food justice is not just talking about like hunger and people in need, but it's also thinking of ideas about, why is it that research on the hungry or the needy never takes into account things like taste, that people have taste and have different needs for what tastes good for them. And so these things only seem to occur when we're talking about, more like middle or upper class interests in food. So if we're a gourmet, then we're concerned about the taste of something or, savoring something. And somehow that kind of discourse or that kind of language gets lost when we're talking about hunger. And the reason I think that's important is because I think that's the reason why a lot of times people talk about food aid in terms of not understanding why people won't eat the various foods that are given to them, right, or why communities in need may or may not adopt a specific diet that's being told is healthy for them. And these things, I think, are very important. And so when we're talking about food justice, I think those are the issues that really kind of drive some of my interest. So it's not just about what kind of food goes where, but why certain foods go and how the community really accepts or doesn't that kind of idea of, what they should or shouldn't have. Because I guess I'm really interested in communities having a voice and having kind of creating community-based efforts from the ground up. And so what can we do as academics? What can we do really to work with communities in developing ideas about what's helpful for them? If that makes sense, hopefully.
No, it makes a lot of sense.
Okay.
And it actually shifts the focus of understanding food justice from a more comprehensive and not, like you said, less explored paradigm or less explored perspective, which is looking at it not only from the perspective of deprivation and hunger, but looking at it in a more complex way as to why is it that we eat what we eat and why is it that we don't eat what we eat, and looking at different nuances in that whole entire spectrum. So what about you, Deb?
Well, food justice is a powerful term, as is justice, and food sovereignty is also a powerful term, which I think is similar in many ways. Food sovereignty perhaps being, the right for all people to produce, harvest, gather, prepare, consume food that is culturally appropriate, food that is connected to their place, to their place that they live. And when I think we talk about food sovereignty or food justice, we also need to look at, well, what are the forces or factors that create injustice? So yes, we want all people everywhere to have food, and there is enough food produced in this world so that no one should be hungry. But inequitable distribution is huge, and that is one of the things that is controlled by a capitalist paradigm. The other thing, though, is I think that there's a lot of corporate influences at play seeking to control the food supply. We see genetically modified organisms and genetically modified food and the proliferation of that worldwide. We see the commodification of food and export crops being insisted upon by some with more wealth and resources, which shifts the way that peasant farmers and others throughout the world are sort of forced to produce food for their own livelihood. So I think there's a lot of influences at play that create injustice. So there's this sort of global and national look at injustice, and the United States, unfortunately, is one of the greatest perpetuators of some of those forces. And then there's also, so how does that trickle down to our communities, and what can we do to create justice in our communities? So it's a combination of recognizing those larger forces and also working from within our communities to build movements of resistance and to build skills for resiliency, so that we can reclaim the power and the right to our own food. And in terms of our organization, that's something we as a small organization working on a community-based level can do is we can help work closely within, not help, but work closely within our own community to reclaim the right to healthy food for all.
Right. That's great. So moving on to the next one, and this time, Deb, you can go first. What about community engagement? How would you define it from your perspective?
Well, I think as a community-based organization, community engagement is really at the heart of what we do at Seeds of Solidarity. And I think I'd maybe briefly describe it by thinking about, well, what are the resources we have in a community? What are the needs in a community? What are the potential partnerships? What are the issues? And then developing strategies and programs and doing the on-the-ground work that not only addresses the needs of a community, but is, really resonates with the people there and meaningfully engages people and listens to what a community needs and the things that might shift or change in terms of those needs to keep kind of providing support and services and programs that that very meaningfully address needs and build stronger partnerships.
Great. What about you, Leda?
Well, I mean, I agree. So, yes. But I think just from the standpoint of coming from the university, I think for me, community engagement is really meant specifically. I've looked at it two ways. One is looking at what courses I teach and how the content of the courses fits with or works with different issues in the community. So if I'm teaching a course, say, on intercultural communication, my students might be looking at different groups in the community and how, like even in working with schools, how we're having to bridge different cultural assumptions. So we spend a lot of time in the classroom kind of looking at who we are, where we come from, what our cultural assumptions are, and then in working with community members, like what happens in the course of that interaction, which I think has been really useful on both sides because it dispels sometimes stereotypes from both angles, from the community as well as from the university. And oftentimes my students find they learn more from the community than they learn in the classroom. So I find that that's really useful. The other way I've approached it is really looking at different projects already going on in the community and trying to, and actually planning my courses around those projects, which I think is really community or civic engagement to me, because it's kind of saying, look, this is already something that's been identified as a need and it's important. What can we add to or what can we help with that people are asking for that's useful to them? And that also works with, our own more theoretical or abstract concepts, as well as, skills that we're hoping that students will get.
So that brings me to the next discussion point, which is critical pedagogy, which is a pretty specific word to academia in some ways that people outside of academia may not have a clear understanding of. How would you say civic engagement, food justice, and critical pedagogy connect in your universe? And a quick look into what critical pedagogy means to people who are not familiar with the term.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think really critical pedagogy, I often go back to just the idea that it's really about how we can change the world through looking at our different assumptions about what we know or what we think we know. And a lot of it involves kind of deconstructing what we learn. So it could be, in the formal education process, or it could just be cultural knowledge. But it's also about valuing what we know. So it's kind of like not assuming that the institution knows everything. So in the case of an educational institution, that all knowledge, because it's contained in the university, is somehow pure and without contamination, and that likewise that everything that I know or have experienced is subjective, comes from me, but also I can be open to other perspectives. And so really it's about trying to create a partnership between, you can say, teacher and student, but also just in the community among people, coming from different perspectives, to be open to justice, to change into ways of, if they see situations where people are being oppressed, or where a situation is inequitable or unfair, where we try to work together to come up with a different way of going about something. So in a broad sense, critical pedagogy is about the fact that everything that happens around us teaches us something, right? So everything becomes pedagogy, but it's like, how do we engage in that towards social justice and change? So within the university, it's about, trying to awaken us to ways that our kind of canons or our forms of doing things may not be beneficial for everybody, and may in fact promote inequitable processes, and also inequities among people. And it's also just about challenging, like creatively trying to think of new ways, different ways of doing things. And so sometimes that's even just developing interventions, within the university. So students are actively doing things to try to create change, or it's, doing things in the community, engaging in dialogues with the community, for instance, to try to come up with new solutions. So.
Okay. So this is a question to both Leda and Deb. Because both of you are coming from different industries right now, which is you're working in the nonprofit world, and your primary work is from the academic world. And so how do the two connect when it comes to, for example, the organization that you're the executive director of, Seeds of Solidarity? What kind of relationships can be built and sustained with academics, so that there can be more of a communication and dialogue between folks like you who are working on different aspects of similar common goal, it seems? So how does that look like, the collaborations, and how do processes like that get off the ground and happen in a seamless and a smooth way, or is it not a seamless and smooth process, working with people of different industries and trying to create community partnerships? How does it work out and translate on ground?
Well, we at Seeds of Solidarity Education Center, and because I'm, very committed to, as an educator also, that's how I came into working in the nonprofit world, just to be able to create an organization so I could do the kind of educational work that's very much, rooted in critical pedagogy and community engagement, as we've talked about. So I've mentored a lot of young people, a lot of interns from a number of different university and community college settings, both on the undergraduate and graduate level at our organization. Engaged them, over a semester or a year or 2 years' time in our programs, and helped them or worked closely with them to kind of to learn in the field and learn in practice. So I think that community organizations have a strong place in partnership with academia to actually provide, a community of practice. Where people can take what they've learned through their studies and scholarship and really apply it and try it out and learn what it really looks like in practice. So I think that's a big piece of it. I think also we've had relationships with UMass, with the community colleges, with Antioch, New England, with a number of the colleges in the area where, we'll go in and share or speak or present in classes. To help and support in that way. I think one of the challenges is and Leda and I were talking about this a little bit earlier, is that, to really do effective community-based work through this critical pedagogy lens, you don't want to kind of sort of come in and drop in and show up and then leave.
Yep.
So I think a question is how do we build really effective partnerships that go beyond kind of a volunteerism type of model, because that doesn't really serve anyone. So it's kind of a conflict, knowing that sometimes students or professors might have limited time, but that might not be the best thing to serve a community, to kind of drop in with sort of a researcher, or a number of hours or a plan or what have you. And we've had that happen a lot, I have to say, in our community, where, we'll sort of be used, and I don't mean used in a bad way, but as a project, but then there isn't necessarily follow through, because the people who created the project understandably go on, to other
Right.
things in their lives. So I think there's two sides of it. It can be really beneficial to have those partnerships, but often historically marginalized communities sort of get used, and then there isn't necessarily follow through, and people get tired of it. People in the community kind of are like, not again.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's insurmountable, but I think it's a question we need to be honest about.
Yes, definitely.
Yes, I guess I would just like to follow some of what Deb just said. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And specifically also for you, I had a question which would add to this, is that you had said in your introduction that you're interested in engaging with the idea of changing education. In what ways would you say that can happen to hopefully sustain process that are related to civic engagement in more effective ways, where hopefully like researchers don't go in for a short time and then just disappear, as she said. So maybe like if you could connect it to also like your vision of like changing education, and perhaps how that could possibly help you in maybe overcoming one of those issues that Deb pointed out.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of things that I've done over the years that, although they weren't necessarily connected with food, I can broaden that out. And one thing is to work closely with a community partner to set up certain roles for students to engage in that then can be continuous. And so even though a student might be in a particular role for a semester, another student will take that over the next semester. The problem is then you have time in between semesters, but if you're talking about, sometimes the breaks are shorter, so it may just be a few weeks. And so we've done that in the past. And so, it's become a way to kind of, the partner's expecting that I'll be there, and I am, each semester, and so they've set up things accordingly. And then the other thing that I've done when I did dialogue work was to train a group of people to give them certain skills to then go into various community settings that then happened with graduate students anyway for 3 or 4 years. And so that was a more sustained period of time that they could do that kind of work. So it also depends on the student. And finally, I would just say another vision that I have that I think is a little more difficult institutionally to try to produce an equitable relationship, but would be to really team teach a course with a community member, so then we're both equally invested in the education of the students. And that's something that I've been, it's kind of like my dream, but I think, it can happen under some circumstances. So that's still something that I'd like to see happen in the future. So yeah, sure. So that's our plan, right?
Yeah, there you go.
Look at what you've created, Fadi.
Thanks. Yeah, so that's always a challenge, what you said, because the follow through and follow up, and sometimes I think it's not even necessarily the fault of people who are engaged in the process, because their lives change, their situations change, there are so many factors, so many uncertainties that put it together. But I guess one of the biggest lessons, and I'm just starting out in this, is to figure out ways in which these gaps and gaps in time and can be somehow reduced, or the process can become more consistent, so that disillusionment that sometimes communities feel that, oh, we're just probably used to gather research and people just leave us when they're done with their work.
I think I'm sorry.
No, that
I was going to say reciprocity. The concept of reciprocity is really important, and that also gets back to and you were speaking to that, Leda, and that gets back also to kind of critical pedagogy, where you're talking about power with rather than sort of power over. So all of us together asking the question, where's the reciprocity, and how can the benefit from this collaboration or partnership be spread and felt equally? And I think if you have those conversations at the beginning, it can change the whole dynamic in a positive way, and everybody sees how reciprocity is an important factor. So
I have one last question that I wanted to ask both of you and each of you, and if I could get, it's more of a personal question really to each of you, but I think it really brings a lot to the table about why you're doing this kind of work and why this matters to you in a way, because both your trainings, you're both doctors, the training in graduate school is often a little bit separated from say, community engagement. So what inspired you? For example, Leda, you're the really proud winner of the Thomas Ehrlich Civic Engagement Award, and which is a really huge deal in our field, in the field of communication. So what do you think led you to win this award, and what made you choose this field, which is a less chosen field in academia, of combining academia with community engagement? And for you, why did you think of using your doctorate in this way, of combining community with your ideas on academic theory? So why did you choose these paths? I'd like to know.
You want to go first?
I guess, yeah, for me, I started doing work in the community in my classes when I was in graduate school, and I think it just stems from, for me, the idea that school shouldn't be separate. It shouldn't be like the ivory tower. It should be something that's deeply connected to what's going on everywhere. And I also really was always kind of concerned about issues of social justice and inequity, and I felt that strongly for a variety of reasons. Things in my schooling and in what I saw around me weren't equitable at all, and so the concern was there to try to make those connections, and I didn't want to be an academic that was somehow divorced from making change, and I didn't feel that my students should feel that either. I felt that if they wanted to be activists, then they should be activists, and I'd like to kind of steer them. We should all be activists in that direction. But ultimately, I think you have to kind of recognize for yourself where, what your own biases and what your own understandings of the world are before you can start to engage in this kind of work. And that's always been a real emphasis for me, is on kind of reflexivity in what I do as well, that I'm always continuously trying to learn about how I'm teaching and how I might change what I'm doing. So,
right.
Yeah.
Thank you. What about you, Deb?
I mean, I think, we each need to ask, what's our passion in this world? Kind of how do we want to, poet Mary Oliver has a line, how do you want to spend this one wild and precious life? And I've also heard the term soul signature used, and that's a real gift to be able to have even the choice or the privilege, in this world to even say, what do I want to do? How can I be of service? So I think for those of us who even have the opportunity to ask those questions, we have a real gift there. And so I think for me, it wasn't actually like a really, I guess, radical jump. I mean, I still taught and still sometimes do teach a bit in.
You still.
Yeah, we might teach together. So, so right now we have some budding partnerships with Greenville Community College, where I'll be teaching some seminars for high school teachers and also teaching, some other courses kind of connected to a larger project. So it does enable me to teach as well and be able to provide teachers or whoever it is with graduate credit for their studies. But I think my doctoral work was actually very much focused on youth who were environmental activists in their communities, in urban communities in that case, and looking at how their cultural and ethnic and racial backgrounds kind of influenced the nature of their engagement. Mm-hmm. So it was kind of our main program at Seeds of Solidarity. Our first program and our flagship program is a program for youth called Soul Garden, Seeds of Leadership Garden. So it wasn't really a radical jump that my focus on working with youth would lead to create an organization whose first program was working with youth, and also working a lot with schools and so forth. So so I think that it's following your passion, and I also like the kind of person who likes to wake up and each day be really different. So I have a lot of creativity in my life, and as a director of an organization, I can work with staff to envision and re-envision programs, and that's really who I am and where my forte is, not so much in the administration and fundraising, which is hard and not my interest, but I do it because I have to. But it is challenging to keep that piece going. I'd much rather just be designing and implementing programs all day.
Thank you. So, I mean, it seems like the time is too short for us to have this long conversation. It really is. But hopefully we'll have more of a continuous conversation outside of this show, where we can have collaborations and doing community projects, because it seems like all three of us are on board when it comes to understanding and interpreting food justice, community engagement, and critical pedagogy, and quite similar ways, and ways that hopefully we can build sustained community connections, as we have said. So thank you so much for being on the show, really. And it's really, I'm so happy that this can happen. And hopefully we can talk more outside of showtime. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.